This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com coming at you for the second night in a row with another UFO related interview, also related to this massive contact in the desert event coming up that just seems like an amazing event. I know we have a lot of international fans on this channel. I know we had an Australian fan watching last night. It is worth the trip. But Captain Ron is one of the producers of the event itself. He's one of the owners. He's been in the UFO community for many years. He's more neutral from the podcasts I've seen with you than some of the researchers. But I'm looking forward to talking to you. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Terrific, man. Getting excited for the show. It's coming up fast.
Yeah, how did you get involved? Because I did listen to a couple podcasts with you, and it seems like you recently are one of the
Yeah,
people that took over.
Gordon and I acquired it actually January of 23. So that was our first year. We kind of still worked with the previous ownership uh, and did that first show that they had already started. And we finished that with them. So this is our first official show with just Gordon and I at the helm. And so it's just over a year that we've had it. This is our first one, and it's our 10-year anniversary of the live event at Contact in the Desert.
So, what have been your goals with taking over this event? I understand it actually started in the real desert. I mean, you're still in the desert, but you were actually in that gruesome heat,
Yeah,
and eventually you moved to a very fancy hotel, but you're
yeah,
still in the desert.
they did that a few years ago, back in 2017-ish. They moved to the hotel we're at now. They used to be out in Joshua Tree, the national park, and it was almost like a Burning Man thing. Like it really was out in the desert. And like you said, problem there was it was 130 degrees. They had ice buckets everywhere for people. It was pretty crazy. And some people love that aspect of it because you were like out in nature with the Joshua trees, literally, sitting in the desert sand, listening to these guys talk. So that was the experience initially, and then it kind of grew, and they moved it into civilization at this beautiful Renaissance resort in Indian Wells, which is right outside of Palm Springs. That whole area is called the Coachella Valley. It's just like 5 little boroughs of Coachella Valley, and one of them's Palm Springs, one of them's Indian Wells, Desert Hot Springs, all these. So basically, people fly to Palm Springs, and it's right there, and it's this gorgeous, huge resort, and we rent the entire thing out. So everybody at this event for those 5 days is part of this event. I mean, this entire thing. It's not like other people are there or other things are happening. It's all part of this event.
So, I was talking last night to the publicist for this event and saying
Yeah.
if any UFO breeds want to actually make themselves known to the world, what a perfect event if you're going to have 3 to 4 thousand people, all researchers out in the desert here in Palm Springs.
Yeah, we're going to have between 2 and 3,000 for sure, and it would be amazing. Obviously, that's the place to do it. Things do happen at Contact, believe it or not, over the years. In fact, last year, uh, remember that Dave Grouch came out. Dave Grouch, whatever, however you say his name, he came out to disclose that he was coming forward as a whistleblower of sorts. When he did that, it was during our event. And so we kind of stopped what we were doing, and two of our prominent top people, Daniel Sheehan and Richard Dolan, kind of came together in the same room, and a lot of us piled in there, and a lot of the speakers that were still there came, and we all watched it unfold together live on TV, and then Danny and Richard kind of gave their take on it. So it was really like a perfect experience to get to have that happen during our event.
Now, as far as what I've heard from you, you're kind of on the fence. You're a researcher. I don't know when this podcast was recorded that I heard of you, but you hadn't actually had any firsthand
No,
experience at
I'm
this
not a
point.
yeah, I'm not a researcher. I just happen I have a podcast. I'm starting a new podcast called Beyond Contact, and I produce this event with Brianna, and we, so I don't have any first hand research on my own, but I have done 6, 7, 800 interviews with a variety of these speakers. So I've researched in that sense and read a lot of this material. And I am very I don't even like to say skeptical. I'm very honest about everything. I'm very I look at this with a very rational, logical view. And although I'm not a huge believer in a lot of these things, I do feel that what motivates me and drives me is the fact that there is something going on here that requires more scientific attention and should be studied. I feel it's an injustice to dismiss all of these contactees that have come forward and the real researchers, people like Dr. Jacobs, who have thousands of cases of people that have come to him and told him of their contactee experience, which he records and he notes and he writes down the similarities and he finds the differences in the cases. And people just dismiss this stuff out of hand, and I think that's not right. I feel like I've done enough looking into the topic to realize that there is enough here that warrants more scientific investigation, and something is going on. There's clearly some things going on. And we've had real people like Dr. John Mack from Harvard look at these cases and study abductees, and he felt that nobody was being delusional or lying. He feels that they had real experiences. I think it's an injustice just to dismiss those things out of hand. That's where I sit.
So do you have a theory personally on what's going on?
I don't. There's a lot of different theories out there. It started off with the 1950s nuts and bolts spacecraft traveling across the universe, and then it's sort of evolved. And lately now it's kind of interdimensional. Seems to be the front running belief that these things are not coming across the galaxy, but they're coming from another dimension. To me, that's even harder to believe than them coming across the galaxy. I feel like it's more real world to just think of somebody that got a jump on us time wise, because the universe is over 13 billion years old and our planet's less than 5. So they've had a lot more time to develop technology. Why couldn't they develop something that would travel here? That makes plausible sense to me. Traveling through dimensions, I know mainstream science says there's possibly 13 dimensions of time or of space plus time, and that's still hard for me to get my head around. I don't know how they're traveling interdimensionally, but some people have reported that they think that's what is happening. So it's fascinating to look at that research, but I don't fall there. I feel like to me, I like to keep it in the real world. I just think they've had more time to develop more technology, and I don't think it's a biological being necessarily coming here every time. They talk about these craft. I like to say how you've seen these reports of crafts going thousands and thousands of miles an hour, and then they do a 90-degree turn, and people are like, well, that can't be real. Their head would come off their body, or their brain would come out the side of their head. Well, what if artificial intelligence is driving that craft? What if there are no beings on that craft? That's what we have now. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go out into the galaxy with artificial intelligence controlled probes that'll send back data. Why? That's very plausible to me that that's what some other civilization would do. They would send a unmanned craft with artificial intelligence on board that doesn't get sick, that doesn't die, that doesn't have these issues that biological beings do, travel across the galaxy, collect all this data, and send it back. That makes rational sense to me. So I believe something like that could happen.
That does make sense. And one thing that I believe could be plausible is that maybe there's bases underwater or somewhere, and they're
Sure,
actually could be coming from here, and it's
sure.
not necessarily far away. Or if it is far away, they're staying here for a while.
There's a
I've
name
heard
for
Grush
that.
talk about interdimensional though, so there are
Yeah,
scientific people talking about it.
that's true too. But there is a name for like people that think the beings are here, like is it
Yeah,
crypto?
crypto terrestrial.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yeah. and that kind of makes sense. But of course, there could be numerous beings from numerous persons. Last night they were talking about 200 to 300. That's again hard for an average person to swallow, but it's possible, I guess.
The thing is, all of this is possible. It's like, when we're talking about these topics, we're talking about an unknown, I like to say, and we are talking about an unknown. So it's fun to speculate, and we should look at the data and see what it shows and see what the possibilities are. I struggle with people that think they've got it figured out and they know the answer and it's definitive, because it's not definitive. We don't know. We're dealing with an unknown here, and I think everybody's just guessing. We're doing the best we can with the data we have, and getting the reports from these pilots and getting these reports from these contactees, and putting it all together and seeing what we can come up with. But we're just to try to understand what another civilization would be doing here, or their motives, or their. It's ludicrous to think that we could figure that out on our own.
Yeah, I find the people that either say that they're all friendly and there's nothing to worry about, or that they're all a threat. I
Mm.
mean, you got to kind of look at both sides. We've seen examples of both over the years.
Absolutely. Stephen Hawking says we shouldn't be trying to get so much attention from other civilizations, because who knows who we're going to welcome in. We may not like what we find, or we may not like whose attention we've got. So I think those are wise words. I think that makes sense, because we don't know. I mean, clearly, if they have the technology to travel all the way to get here, they're more advanced than us. And based on what we know about our planet, that means trouble, right? Technology always wins.
Yeah, and on our own planet doesn't even get along. There's so many wars going on all the time. So how can we act like every civilization is going to have the same intentions? But I actually asked Nick Pope, one of your guests, when I interviewed him, about Stephen Hawking's warning there that we shouldn't be sending these signals out. And Nick said, well, they've already been sent out. It's really
Right.
too late for that.
Right. That's true. Not to mention the nuclear blast that we made. They say, a lot of people think in the subculture that that's the reason that we had these sightings in 1947, right after we dropped these bombs and right after we did that, because you'd see that or detect that from far away. Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it would be interesting if you could somehow get Tom DeLonge as one of your speakers sometime, because I've heard him talking about they may have overcome this side effect, but there was something to do with nuclear bombs going off that affects their propulsion and causes crashes. And he even theorized, well, he said he'd possibly heard this somewhere, that this operation, I think it's called Starship Prime or something, may not have the name right, where they blew up nuclear bombs in space, may have actually had an ulterior motive than just testing nuclear bombs. They may have actually been trying to knock some things out of space.
Well, that's very interesting. Every one of these ideas makes a great movie, right? Like even that, there's an elevator pitch right there for a film.
Yeah, that definitely. And as far as your guests, you got Travis Walton, who I've also interviewed him.
Great.
He's a
He's
classic.
awesome.
Is there any in particular this year that you're really excited about?
I'm really excited. We're going to do something very special. We're going to have a legends panel. And on that panel, we're going to have Travis Walton, Whitley Strieber, George Norrie, Richard Dolan, um, Linda Moulton Howe, and Russell Targ. I mean, all of these people have had such an influence on the community. Whitley and Richard, I think, are two of the strongest writers that we have out there, and they talk about this with the right tone, I believe. And I think Travis is a fascinating guy and a very good one. So it's great to pay tribute to them. I think that that's going to be one of the highlights for me. We're doing a George and George a conversation with George Knapp and George Norrie. Apparently, they've never been on stage together, which is kind of cool. These legendary guys from coast to coast. I also like the AI stuff is sort of my favorite interesting topic right now with Matthew James Bailey and Adam Curry and some of these other guys that are going to be talking about aspects of artificial intelligence and how that affects things. And they're going to do a live Turing test, which is like to determine whether something is, if you can tell the difference between a human being and artificial intelligence. You know what I'm saying? Like that movie Blade Runner, where they couldn't tell always if something was real or if it was like an avatar. Well, they're going to do it live in front of an audience. They're going to give answers, and then people have to decide, did an artificial intelligence give that answer, or did the human being give that answer?
Very interesting. Another guy you have, and I noticed, I don't know how to necessarily pronounce his last name, Robert
Yeah,
Salas, I
Bob
think.
Salas.
Yeah,
He's a guy who
he was there for one of the for nuclear
Maelstrom Air
incidents,
Force
right?
Base.
Yeah.
Maelstrom Air Force Base. Yeah, Bob's amazing. He was a direct eyewitness to that when they turned off our nukes and turned them back on, and they saw the craft or whatever be above the sky when he was way down under the earth. That's a fascinating story. A lot of these military guys are some of our most credible witnesses in the community, I believe. These are highly respected, highly decorated guys. You don't get that job to work at a nuclear site. They can turn the keys and send the nukes. You got to be a high level guy to work there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, when I watched, I think there's a half an hour interview up somewhere of him online. He just seems so credible and so serious with such so honorable and such high rank. There's no way he'd be making this up and going on the record if this didn't happen.
And Jesse Marcel from the Roswell days is the same thing. This guy was in charge of security for the only nuclear base in the world at the time. People forget that was a high level guy, and he's the guy who made the claim that this was not a weather balloon. I mean, he knew better. He was like, this is metal. This is a craft. So I don't like that's my pet peeve, if you will, how we dismiss these guys. These are credible, real guys. How come we can't listen to Avi Loeb from Harvard, who'll be speaking? And how about, like I said, John Mack from Harvard? These guys it's hard to get those ranking jobs that these guys got. They get to the top of their field and they're the greatest. And then they talk about UFOs and people go, okay, this guy's no good. Well, no, he's a highly decorated, highly respected guy. So I feel people get shortchanged on that.
Yeah, and I've actually interviewed Avi Loeb too, and it's humbling talking to him because of how smart he is. It's like I'm not even worthy to talk to you because your intelligence level is so high. So him being interested in this definitely gives it a lot of credibility. Richard Dolan, he was recently in the TMZ documentary, and I also saw him in a podcast with George Knapp. So that's a good guy to get as well.
Knapp alone is great. George Knapp and Richard Dolan are no doubt in my very, 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 very top of my favorites in this community. I think they take the most level-headed approach to this. They take a journalistic, intelligent look at the data, which is what many people do not do. Those two that you called out, I think, are the prime example and typical contact in the desert type guests, and we're really happy to have them. Two of my favorites, two of the most important people in our community, is they still both are doing really important work, and they use true journalism. They look at the data, they look at the cases, they look at all the ins and outs of these cases, and they come to some really interesting conclusions. These are not guys that are looking for some what do you call it? National Enquirer story. They're not. They're looking for the real thing. And I think it's really important to have people like that. And I wish other people would look at their work and see The people that dismiss this out of hand drive me crazy, because it's like, why don't you look at the data first, read their books, then tell me that there's nothing here.
Here in Canada, a lot of what's been going on in the US with the congressional hearings and stuff has hardly even been covered. There's just
Wow.
been small stories. So when you talk about it here, people still kind of look at you like you're foolish sometimes. But
Hmm.
then you try and say, well, the US has actually admitted that UAPs exist. They may not be aliens, but they actually exist. But they just don't believe it because there hasn't been news on it in the mainstream here as much.
There are many people that won't believe it if the president of the United States or can or wherever comes out and says we've got it. That doesn't mean they're going to believe it. It's an incredibly divisive belief system people have on this, and as Canadian Stanton Friedman used to say, "Don't bother me with the facts. I've already made up my mind." People do that politically in the United States these days, and I feel like that's happening in the UFO community too. People are like believers or non-believers in the phenomenon, and and there's so few of us in the middle that are like, "Well, I don't know, but let's take a look." And I've looked enough to feel like there's something here. We really need to pay more attention and put more resource into finding out what's going on instead of dismissing it out of hand. I think that's a real cop out to just dismiss it out of hand. Oh no, nothing happened at Roswell. That's already been debunked. Well, that's not true. And did you look at the data? Have you read the books? Have you seen the eyewitness testimonials? Look at the data and then let's talk about it. You know what I'm saying? That's where I kind of live.
Now, I had, by the way, someone says you look like the former wrestler Sean O'Hare. That's actually a
Oh,
compliment
how funny.
coming from a wrestling fan. He was in really good shape, but yeah, you have similar hair that he had. Someone, I don't know anything about this. I know Trump talked somewhat at the start when he first got into presidency. He was totally against UFOs, but he was dropping more hints that they could be real towards the end. But this person is saying that Trump allegedly said there's Air Force teams that solely exist to monitor and chase UFOs. I don't know about that. Have you heard
I
anything
don't
about
know.
this?
And we often you hear different things. I mean, obviously, again, it's just speculation because we don't know. But the speculation is that a lot of the presidents, certainly since Nixon, they say, uh, they don't even tell them about this. Like this is such a black budgeted, compartmentalized area that they don't even have the president in the loop on these things, which it's hard to believe. But then again, keepers of this knowledge don't come and go every 4 years. They obviously have this knowledge. If there is such a thing, I could believe that. You know what I'm saying?
Everyone was saying that Hillary Clinton would have been the president to disclose it because she seemed to have a genuine interest in it, and people on her team that wanted
John
disclosure
Podesta,
and willing
sure.
to talk had you heard that as well?
Yeah, John Podesta was supposedly very much interested and had been pushing for this for years, and he was part of her team. So I think a lot of people in this community were kind of hoping that if they got in, that perhaps they would disclose. And disclosure is one of these words that everybody's got a different definition of disclosure. To a lot of people, it means the president comes out, pulls up a tarp and says, "There's the ship. Here's a picture of the bodies," and the president does it. And other people are like, "Well, we have disclosure. We've had many direct eyewitnesses come forward and tell their story." And I think it's going to be a long, long time before you get the big D disclosure from a head of state. I really do.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter anymore now that everyone has cell phones. If there was a mass sighting, I mean, it would be disclosed. I don't think they'd be able to cover it up too well.
Well,
Although
no,
for
but
the
hold on a
Phoenix
second
Lights,
there,
they
brother.
managed to.
Uh, that's a really great point. Yes, if there was a mass, let's say there was a Phoenix Lights 2024. In one sense, yes, now we have social media. Everybody's got a camera on their pocket, and we would have that. But I think there's still a ton of people that would not believe it. They would not believe it. They don't. How do you know that that's a UFO? And how do you know? I think that it wouldn't be like that. It would not be, well, we got all these things, pictures of these lights. We already have a lot of good video footage of that, and a lot of people don't believe it. And in fact, there was this thing in 2001 that's worth researching. I know you're sort of new to this community, and here's a great thing to look up. In 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer did the Disclosure Project, and they testified at that they did a presentation at the National Press Club, and they brought forward all these direct witnesses, guys with stacks of files, tapes, recordings, military guys. Tons of people came out and said, look, we've got objects on radar, 90-degree turns, speeds we can't imagine. All this testimony came forward. And in fact, the interesting thing I like to point out all the time is the interviews with these guys beforehand. They all said they didn't sleep the night before because once they did this, they thought the whole world would know that UFOs are real and there is another extraterrestrial presence here because we've disclosed that. And it didn't happen. It was a blip. I mean, it was fascinating for people in this community, and a few people came on board. But in general, it didn't move the needle. The vast majority of people still don't believe that that's real. And that's a good example of what I'm talking about. So even if you had hundreds of videos of a triangular or disc-shaped thing flying over LAX, and there were all these videos, people would claim it was a movie stunt, or it was photoshopped, or it was false flag, that they're creating a hologram. There'd be all kinds of things. I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that the world would then go, oh yeah, it's real.
This guy has a good point. We have a big eclipse coming soon. Apparently, you're going to be able to see it from here. That would be the best time when everyone's looking at the sky.
Are you in line for that? Yeah, that would be a
Yeah.
great time. That's a good point. I'm actually flying to Cleveland to see the eclipse. I'm going to be leaving in a couple days to be up there. Is that go right through where you are as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just saw a big thing on the news of it the other night.
I hope we get good weather in Cleveland and up in Canada so we can actually see it well.
Yeah, it's been a nice couple days here, but we're supposed to get a bit more snow than the next 3 days. And I just have to ask you about Captain Ron. I used to love that movie. Is that where you got the Captain Ron name from, or?
I did a podcast back in 2014 when I first started doing podcasts and shows, and they needed a nickname for me for the show. I was doing it with this other guy. His nickname was Dr. 420, and they wanted me to have a name for the show, and I couldn't think of anything, and I didn't really want to do that, and so they sort of picked it that day, and I'll be damned, it just sort of stuck, and people just started calling me that.
Yeah, it's a cool name. And as far as Stephen Greer goes, I don't know if he's been at Contact in the Desert before.
He
He
has,
did do a
absolutely.
lot of great work. Some of his work seems to be lately more propaganda-ish, but he still does great work. But I've had a few like issues with some of the stuff he said. Is he going to be a possible guest for the future? What are your views on him?
Well, he's certainly been there in the past. I've interviewed him at Contact in the Desert before, so he's definitely been a speaker there. It's always possible, he's got another movie I think he's working on. He's done a series of films that I think actually do have a lot of good information. If you've ever watched his films, they have a lot of good information, and they expose people to a lot of these ideas. And he has different thoughts on this. He thinks they're very benevolent, and no one's ever been harmed by a UFO or an alien or whatever. Well, I mean, again, that's speculation. How do we know that? I don't know. I think the jury's out on some of his stuff, but he has certainly done great work, and he certainly has brought a lot of attention to this as well. And supposedly, he claims that he's had a lot of contact with a lot of high-ranking officials in our government, and he has debriefed them on this subject. And that would be fascinating if it's true, right? Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, and I do believe that he probably has,
Sure.
but again, some of the stuff, as you mentioned, with everyone being benevolent, we don't have to worry, and anything bad is a false flag. It's really the government. Some of that might be, but I don't know if I fully buy his. It must be hard actually to be in your position because for people that are outside of the UFO industry, it's very political in some ways with what
Interesting.
camps you're in. Um,
Yeah, there's little subdivisions within the UFO community too, and insanely, there's infighting of just like there is in world religions that are slightly different. They argue with each other. It does trickle into this community a little bit. There is a lot of infighting, and I don't like that. I feel like we're all pulling in the same direction, and we all want to get to the truth, and we all want to know what's really going on. That's sort of where I sit, and anything I can do to help facilitate that, awesome. I really just want to know more. I want these people. If this is all real, I would like these people to be vindicated, if you will. I mean, I can really. A lot of people that have these claims have had their lives absolutely ruined, lost their job, lost their husband, lost their spouse, whatever it is, and that's tragic, and it's a shame, and there's such a demonization of the topic. Certainly not so bad now, but there was for many years, and it still persists to a degree today, that if you talk about this in the wrong place, some people look down on that or think less of people, and so maybe they don't share their story. All the thousands and millions of people that have come forward with their story, great, but think about how many more are out there who haven't because of fear of ridicule, which is ridiculous to me. I mean, in this day and age, I think let's just talk about everything and see what's out there. And I think there's other information that I wish more people would come forward with, so that we can all try to get a better picture of what really is happening. Can we decide, is this interdimensional? Is this interplanetary? Is this a spiritual thing? Is it off world? What is it, and what's happening? And there may be 10 answers to this. There may be more than one of these that's true.
the time travelers theory as well. Is it time travelers?
Yeah,
Anything's possible.
that's a great point. I completely forgot about that one. That's an excellent point. That's another one that's hard for me to believe. I mean, I feel like that's much harder to believe, that people could travel through time in the sense that we think of it when we see it in movies. I feel like that's a hard thing to get your head around, versus getting my head around another civilization of some sort that could build up technology over billions of years to travel or send probes in the universe. That's very logically possible in my brain. Like, I can imagine that happening. It seems like what they would do. Most all people believe there is probably intelligent life in the universe. It's so vast. So take it another step, and wouldn't you think that maybe they would do something that would have them explore the universe? Of course they would. So to me, you keep it all in real world, and they send out artificial intelligence probes to examine other areas of the galaxies. That just makes sense to me. I think that's very plausible.
I agree with you 100% on that. You mentioned Stephen Greer had some decent movies. Is there any UFO movies, if it's maybe a wrestling fan that just happens to catch this because they're a fan of my wrestling on the channel, that you would suggest they watch if they have like their interest piqued a little bit by our talk?
Well, there are some good movies. Accidental Truth came out last year by Ron James. Is a good film. Um, of course, what's his name, has done some great films. His name's eluding me. It'll pop into my head.
Jeremy Corbell, I think.
Well, Corbell, he's done some stuff. He did stuff with Bob
George
Lazar,
Knapp.
which is
Yeah.
interesting, controversial, but very interesting. I was going to say, I was going to mention some books that I think are important as well. And when you interview these speakers, most of them will say that they got interested in this topic by one of the following two books, which is Eric Van Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, and then Whitley Strieber, who we've been talking about, Communion. These two books, I hear it all the time. If you ever ask the question to one of the speakers, well, what got you started? It's one of those two books, all the time. And they are both really good books. I think those really strong. What I recommend to people is the books by Don Schmidt and Thomas Carey on Roswell. They have like the Encyclopedia of Roswell, and it's got interview after interview with direct witnesses and deathbed confessions and all of this ancillary information that make a very, very compelling case that something happened at Roswell, and it sure seems like it could have been an off-world craft landed there and bodies were recovered. When you read that material, it's very compelling, and I don't feel like most people take the time to read that and dismiss it out of hand. So that's where I would send people. Read that on Roswell from Don Schmidt. That is a compelling thing. You read that and you walk away, and it's hard for me to refute what they've done.
Yeah, and Chariots of the Gods, of course, inspired Ancient Aliens. Whitley Strieber, who's one of your guests, I haven't read Communion yet, but I got the audiobook of them that I've listened to 4 or 5 times. Man, do I get some weird nightmares when I listen to that and fall asleep during it. But it's a very good audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was based on letters that were written to him after he wrote Communion.
Yeah, and he does talk about the communion there, and he has some good points in general about all the various theories, and he does seem very neutral in it,
He
which I like.
top guy. Whitley's fantastic, and people need to pay attention to him. Again, I think he's getting overlooked a little bit. He is still today, still doing podcasts, still doing Unknown Country. He still is putting out fantastic stuff and is still a really important person in the community. You know, I read his book literally when it came out, which is like 87. And I remember people telling me that, well, you know, he's a fiction writer. That was his day job at the time when all this happened and he came out with Communion. He had written Wolfen and a few other best-selling books. And that was a great point. You know what? You're right. The guy's a science fiction writer. Maybe he's making this up. But now you flash forward, it's been, 40 years, and he's as knee deep in this community as he's ever been. He sticks to all of his stories. He still talks about this. He still doesn't know what's actually happening. And I feel like he's more credible today than he was in 1987 when we didn't know this much about him. And he didn't spend most of his life researching these topics.
Yeah, it's funny. I discovered him because I saw him do an interview with Jim Semivan, a
Mhm.
former CIA guy who's very credible again, and he had a negative experience actually, him and
Yep.
his wife. Um, but I was watching this podcast. I'm like, why is this guy interrupting Jim Semivan so much? No one wants to hear about him. Then I look up who Whitley Strieber is, and I'm like, of course.
Yes.
How could I even have been offended by that after I
He's on our
figured out?
Legends panel for a reason, deservedly so.
Definitely. So as far as all the panels, and oh, the other thing I wanted to ask you about before I forget is the speaking of Stephen Greer, he's famous for these CE5s. He's actually popularized them. You're
Mhm.
having a CE5 session at this event. Some people, like I've heard George Knapp say, you got to be careful with that because it's kind of like a Ouija board. You don't really know what you're summoning. Some people will say, well, Greer charges a fortune, it's all a work. But then I've talked to others that say they actually see stuff. But then I'm thinking to myself, if you're actually seeing stuff, why aren't we getting more evidence out of these CE5s?
I completely agree with that. Yeah, we do it every Sunday night at our event every year. They do it, and it's free. All those things are free, and we have night vision goggles, and different people see different things. Yeah, I know Stephen Greer's thing's very expensive. and I've had people who have gone on his trips come back with the opposite information. Some people say they didn't care for it. Other people say it was the greatest thing in the world, and they felt like they really did see things. So I don't know. It's not the tailpipe from a from a UFO craft. So it's not definitive enough for a lot of people, and I get that.
Who has been some of the most interesting guests that you've met over the years? Because I met Travis Walton up in Snowflake, Arizona, and it was quite an experience that I'll never forget. And I won't go into that whole story, but it's really like meeting a character out of a movie when you meet this guy. He's quite a character indeed.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of before I got involved in this during COVID, I started something called the Observation Deck, and we had an event where we had Travis Walton there. It was an all day online virtual event, and Travis Walton was there, and we had brought in the other guys that were in the truck with him during their episode. We had his brother. Him and his brother hadn't talked in years. We brought his brother in. We brought the investigators that were there the day it happened or he went missing. All of these people came for this all day thing we did online. It was fascinating. And I think again, he stuck to this story for all these years, and I find him very credible. I genuinely like Travis. I think he's very believable. It's interesting talking to the other guys that went through this thing with him as well. A lot of them don't wish it never even happened to them. They're not seeking fame from this. A lot of these guys aren't. That's the thing that's compelling to me also. I've had the good fortune of talking firsthand with some of these guys, and you can just tell when you're talking to somebody if they're like they're almost like broken down by this. It's not like it's always a good experience. I don't like when people outside this or people that don't know much about this community dismiss these guys that they're trying to make money and that they're not. I'm sure there's hoaxers out there. I'm sure there's people trying to make money on this. I'm sure. However, I do believe a lot of these people, whatever it is happening to them, is genuine, and they have had their lives genuinely destroyed through whatever experience they've actually had.
I will say about Travis, he seemed genuinely traumatized and
Yeah.
shaken by his experience when he was talking about it. There's definitely some things that your average person might call into question about it, but there's definitely seemed like I would my film crew guy that was with me, Donald, that day. He's a full non-believer, and he thought it was all ridiculous. But he said that man has been through some trauma. He said I don't know what happened with him, but something happened.
Perfect example. Good for that guy. Exactly. See, I've had several of these experiences with talking with different experiencers, and I'll be damned if that's not compelling as hell. I mean, like you said, you could tell that this guy's been through something. This has been a real experience, a traumatic experience. I feel that these guys are worth their due. They should get their day, and hopefully they will.
Now, I've heard you say, and you brought it up here, Roswell is a very credible one for people to look up. We already talked about the Phoenix Lights. Nick Pope always talks about Rendlesham Forest, which I'm sure he'll talk about at this event as well. But what are some of the events that you would suggest people look up
The
as far
cases.
as incidents? Yeah.
Well, there's a lot. I think Terry. Oh God, what the heck's Terry's name? Do you know who I'm talking about? Terry Lovelace. Excuse me, Terry Lovelace is an excellent case. He was a military guy, and do you know that case, the Devil's Triangle or whatever, with Terry Lovelace? Are you familiar with him?
No, I've never heard of it, but I'll look it up now that you mention it.
He wrote a very good book. Um, And Terry Lovelace and his buddy were in the Army, and they went camping, and they had an experience, and they saw a craft go over, and he goes through the whole thing that happened to him. And he has a lot of fascinating little things. I'm trying to recall some of them. Like, he has a thing where his cell phone, he claims to have been, classic, typical abduction case where he gets taken, goes up to a ship, and comes back. And he had taken his phone to Apple, and his phone, Apple came back to him and said, well, you were on a helicopter or something because your phone was 10,000 feet in the air or whatever, because the GPS recorded this. And he's like, no. and it's synced up from when he had this experience. So he has actually a unique piece of evidence that his phone recorded his GPS location, and it actually took him into the air, and then it brought him back, and it's recorded on his Apple thing, and it's the only time that's happened. I find that compelling and interesting. And a lot of these cases, I can't think of them by name necessarily, but there are cases where different abductees will say that they've come back and they're like, these aren't my shoes. And a neighbor or somebody will have their shoes, and they remember seeing that guy on the craft. I find these very compelling, if that's true, because there's some things about, them making them get naked and all this. Then when they get dressed, they give them the wrong shoes. That's fascinating to me. And I certainly like the cases when there's multiple witnesses. I find that more compelling. I also find it more compelling when it's one individual thing. I feel it's more plausible. This is maybe my personal thing. If somebody has a normal life, you hear these stories. I've read so many different accounts of contactee experiences where a guy's a normal guy, 45 years old, worked as an accountant for 20 years, normal life. One day he wakes up, there's an alien being with big eyes at the end of his bed. It messes him up, and his whole life kind of comes apart. But it's like that one thing happened to him. He had this one contact experience. That seems very I guess credible to me. Where when some people have told me stories and they're like, well, I've been on a variety of ships. I've gone through time portals and gone back in time. I've gone through stargates and walked on 9 different planets. I've been in the bottom of Air Force bases underground and worked on alien bodies. And I've served a 20 and back, and I've done. They've got all of these 1 in a billion things happen to the same person. That's harder for someone like me to digest. So
Yeah,
that's
or
where
they say that the aliens told them about everything that happened and all these other UFO events, so they're experts on everything.
Anyone that feels like they're an expert or they have the answer, that's first red flag for me, because even if you really genuinely have had an alien experience, the fact that you think you know the answers, I think is not good. That's where a guy like Whitley Strieber is a perfect example of somebody, like, he still doesn't know what happened to him. And he says, I've been known as the alien guy. I never said it was aliens. He doesn't know what it is. Fascinating. Those are the people that I gravitate to, that I feel personally have the stronger cases and the more compelling stories.
Yeah, and I find that interesting about him too from that book that I recently bought.
Them.
Yes, where he's talking about he doesn't know what they are. He thinks they might be aliens, but they could be a number of things. But he also talks about how much it bothered him that he actually, according to his story, he experienced anal tearing, which was traumatic, and it still bothers him, and it became a big joke, and he
Absolutely.
finds that very insulting.
But how horrible. Yeah, well, I mean, how horrible that this guy had to go through that on top of everything else. It's not enough he had to have this abduction experience. Now he's got this physical ailment, and the ridicule of that and the jokes of that. It's just ridiculous. Good for him for getting through all that. You know what I mean?
The one story in them that I always have to skip this chapter because it really bothered me. I think I listened to it twice. Was there was a young girl that was abducted that supposedly, according to the letter he got, actually got infected with something, and she came and told her mom she was sick after the abduction, and she actually became deathly ill within weeks after that and died. And the aliens, I guess, apologized to the mom and said she's too young to treat for this. I think it was some form of bugs that they called it, but yeah, that was a sad story. I think she was like 10 or under.
Wow, can you imagine? I mean, losing your daughter, and then on top of it, here's why she's telling you that an alien took me away and gave me this illness accidentally. I mean, wow, that's a tough one to swallow. Your heart goes out to those people, right?
Yeah, the one thing that I always wonder about, and I'm sure it is a factor, is like just being exposed to some, if they are from other planets, if you're entering their ship that has been open in this environment that may have stuff floating around in it that we are poison to whatever this is, and them coming here too. I'm sure there's issues with Earth itself. That's why I've heard some reasons why they go underwater, because it's more of a stable environment. But yeah, you think about just the environmental differences in the atmospheres.
Or the like you know the contagions, like you said, the bugs, the look how careful NASA is opening up a moon rock. You know, everything's got to stay in a you know secure, safe thing because who knows, and we don't want to get any microbes. We don't want to send microbes across the galaxy. You know, it's true that's a very real possibility. I mean, they could accidentally cough on somebody and wipe out our whole planet, or vice versa.
Yeah, and the one thing is, we have heard some cases like Travis believes that for people that don't know this, apparently you should not go and investigate the ships. Do not go close to the ships. Do not touch them. There's some sort of radiation issue you could get, but Travis touched this ship and it shocked him and knocked him out. And he feels that in his case, which he didn't understand at first, they actually took him aboard to save him. And some other case, some
Yeah.
people have claimed they've been cured of stuff due to these abductions.
Absolutely, you hear that, and yes, that's right. Travis absolutely now feels he didn't feel that way when it happened, of course, but now he feels, looking back, that they were actually trying to save him from this. And yeah, a lot of people that have touched craft or claim to have get radiation burns and have an adverse reaction. That's very true.
Yeah, I interviewed someone recently that said it's best to stay in your car because I guess they found that the car can actually provide some safety from these radiation issues, and do not shine bright lights at these UFOs because there's been cases where people have got shone back with a light that's caused permanent eye damage or
Oh my
cancer, I
god.
understand.
A lot of people do feel, you hear cases where people feel they have that they're changed through these experiences. They become more green, if you will. They care about the earth more. They become softer typically, and they some people believe they can like have these other abilities like healing or telepathy or other things that they've gotten through these experiences.
Very true. And the one thing I do notice is you rarely hear them given a negative message. I've heard some cases where, even in Whitley's latest book, there's a case where someone pulled up, they thought it was midgets or carnival people, and when they pulled up to see what was going on, it ended up being weird beings that basically said, "Get out of here." But in most cases, they're giving some sort of environmental message or message of love. You don't hear as much threatening messages.
That's true. I definitely, if I saw something like that, I'd get out of there so fast it's not even funny. Um, yes, oftentimes people say they're shown images of Earth. It's typically, stop fighting and cherish your planet is often sort of the underlying message to these things. An interesting thing here that I think you touched on is they've done studies on contactees, like the Free organization. Um, the Edgar Mitchell founded Free organization did a giant survey, and I don't remember the numbers. It's been years, but 2 or 3 thousand contactees filled out all of these answers, and typically the bottom line was to the effect of most people obviously were very traumatized by being taken out of their bed or taken against their will or whatever abduction experience they went through. They were horrified by that. Most all, almost all. But as years go on and people have had ongoing experiences, which is typically the case, uh, the number gets as high as 80% of people feel now that it was a positive experience and that it helped them in their life and that they're glad it happened to them, which I find absolutely fascinating.
100%, and you're right. The abductions seem to be generational, or it's almost like they're like watching us, like we would put something in a wild animal or something to follow
Absolutely.
their progress in life. So very interesting. As far as contact in the desert, tell us how we can get tickets. Give us a rundown on what's going on. There's the website again.
Yeah, that's the best place to go is contactinthedesert.com. Everything's on there. Just peruse that for a few minutes and your head will spin. There's so much to do. We have over 70 speakers. We have 14 different panels of most of them have 6 people on them. So there are these incredibly uh, diverse panels with different viewpoints on each of these topics. And then there's other things going on. There's a bus that goes out to the desert where you can look at the sky with our astronomer Mark D'Antonio. And there's other things that happen on site, like we have podcasts that happen every single day. You can sit in on a live podcast interviewing one of our speakers. You can see I think 4 or 5 brand new documentaries that are about our fields, and they're going to debut at Contact in the Desert. And we play Hollywood movies outside at night. They're going to play E.T. and Dee Wallace, the mom in E.T. is going to introduce that, and a couple other movies, Hollywood movies outside, which is fun watching movies outside at 10 o'clock at night in the desert. It's kind of a cool thing. There's so many things that we have 8 stages basically going on at any one time, all day, every day. So there's tons to choose from. You kind of do your best to pick and choose your favorites or what you think you'd like. It's fun to go to a panel and then you see somebody you really like on a panel and then you go see them talk. And if you really like them, you can even upgrade and get a workshop or an intensive with them, and that's more time with them. And the intensive experiences are like these. On Monday they're like 2.5 hours with these speakers, so you get this intimate chance to spend time with them. And a lot of them do AMAs where they ask me anything, and you can ask them anything. And what a great opportunity that is.
And you're one of the speakers as well.
Well, I'm just going to be doing. I'm doing a couple conversations with a couple speakers, and I'm going to be part of the George and George thing. Tom Danheiser, the producer of Coast to Coast, and I are going to ask questions of George Knapp and George Norrie, and then we're going to open it up to the audience and let them ask them questions too. That's going to be a lot of fun, something they've never done before.
Well, it sounds like a great event and an amazing location there in Palm Springs, California, out in the desert. Perfect location for this. Great vacation for people if they want to take a break and also be around like all the top stars, if you want to call them
Yeah,
stars
these
in
are
the UFO
celebrities in our
business.
world, man, no doubt. And the resort's beautiful. We got a pool. It's just an amazing pilgrimage kind of to get away from everything, brother.
It's funny. I've seen some of these CIA guys, and even like Tim Burchett, the congressman. He's become such a celebrity in UFOs, and these people would never be celebrities otherwise.
Yep.
But now they're actually like, to people like me, they're like Mel Gibson to see.
Right. Yeah, I'd much rather talk to Tim Burchett for sure.
Yeah, especially if he's got his famous jacket on.
Right.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Maybe a little closer to the actual contact in the desert, because it's still nearly 2 months away, a little under 2 months away. You could come on again and remind people, but I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Well, Devin, I would say just come out and experience it live. We're doing 2 new things this year. You can buy a 1-day pass, which we've never done before. So if you want to just try it out, if you live close enough that it's worth trying it for 1 day, come out and get a sense of it. It's oftentimes not what people think. It is not this tinfoil hat, crazy people walking around. It's more of an academic science, artificial intelligence, futurist kind of vibe and atmosphere. We do have a lot of that, of course. We have experiencer groups and those kind of things, but we also have a lot of more cerebral takes on things and scientists walking around, and it's just a lot of fun. So you can do that, and we also have a virtual pass this year where you can actually, if you can't make it out here, maybe you live in Canada near Devon, then you just get the virtual pass. You can check it out online. You can participate online, and that'll give people a chance to be part of this anyway. And the dream is, of course, if you can make it out there, it's so much fun to do this live and in person and rub elbows with all these guys.